Hey guys, it's Rich with your Monday Spot on the Pagan Perspective. Before I get into this week's topic, I do want to offer a trigger warning because we are going to be talking about issues of rape and rape culture and whatnot, and kind of how do we deal with that in our personal practice. So I do want to offer that trigger warning before I get into reading the question and all that other stuff, to give you guys the opportunity, if this is not a topic that you are comfortable with, that you can, just excuse yourself as necessary. That being said, let's go ahead and get on into this week's topic. This week's topic comes from birdsetfree. The entire topic, question, and everything like that will all be in the description box as per usual, but I'm not going to read it all because it is quite lengthy, and it is basically dealing with horrible aspects of our history. And they write, many ancient pagan religions and practices had beliefs that we find offensive today. This question is not aimed at human or animal sacrifice, but rather the ancient pantheons and deity-based beliefs. Many of you have a god or goddess, or a select few, or an entire pantheon of gods you worship. I personally follow the Hellenic or Greek pantheon, and I felt conflicted because Greek society was extremely patriarchal based, and this is similar to other pantheons. Many of the gods rape, abuse, and take advantage of gods, nymphs, humans, etc. Within mythology, these are seen as acceptable. I went into detail concerning the Greek pantheon, but I wish to pose this as more of a general question. I understand myths are not always reliable, and the nature of ancient religions is fluid, but in my personal experience, these skeletons in my closet rarely disappear. It is always in the back of my mind, that hint of hesitation in my practice. So in this topic, they say 4 main questions that they have, and number 4 is being the most crucial, so we'll get to that one, of course, last. Build suspense and whatnot. So anyway, the first one is, what are your opinions of rape in ancient paganism? Now, I can't really say about ancient paganism because that is not necessarily where my beliefs lie. My beliefs are more in the Christo-paganism, Gnostic kind of realm, I guess you would say. Not necessarily Gnostic in the truest sense, but in a form thereof. I would guess that would be the best way to phrase that. But anyway, as a Christo-pagan, I can definitely, kind of relate to, how do we deal with, certain aspects of our practice that we don't necessarily agree with. In Christianity, you have a majorly patriarchal society that, not only told women that they could not be involved in the church, for the most part, did not look good on them at all, which I don't think is necessarily the way that it was supposed to be. I think that Mary Magdalene should have been the first pope, and I think that she rightfully was the first pope, but that's a whole different topic. Again, patriarchal society, what you gonna do? That is in the past. Even though I love studying history, my opinions of it are that it is something that happened, and it's something we cannot change, and is something that we can only move forward from and learn from and grow from. So it's constantly seeing into the future, seeing what our next step is going to be. Are we going to continuously hold the Catholic Church to the killing of thousands, if not millions of people? The numbers are always debated within the witch trials and whatnot. Are we going to hold them accountable for that? Absolutely. I think we should hold them accountable to their actions as of that time. But we should not say that the Catholic Church of that time frame is still the Catholic Church of today. So in that aspect, I don't think that we can necessarily say that the type of Catholicism that was practiced back then is the same Catholicism that is practiced today. So with that, I want to say that, we do grow. We learn from the things that have happened in the past, and we grow from there. So what do I think about it? I think that they were horrendous and horrific acts that were done in the past, but I don't think they directly affect us in today's culture, in today's world. Do I think that we should still pay homage to the fact that, there were all these people killed because they were supposed as witches. Whether they were or were not is still up for debate. Should we still pay homage to those people that were beaten, hung, torched, whatever, all the different methods of torture? Do we still pay homage to the fact that these were acts that were committed by the church at that time? Yes, we still pay homage to that. We still can grieve those acts as acts that were horrendous and horrific in that time span of history. But after a certain point in time, we have to say, okay, we are not those people. We are not directly affected by those actions anymore, but instead we are looking forward, and we have to see not only what is in the now, but what is in the future, as far as, how is the church interacting with us today? We just say, you know what? They do their thing, we do our thing, and we're just fine with that. Can we come to some sort of agreement? If we can, fantastic. If we can't, why not? So that's something that I have to do within my practice whenever it comes to certain type of aspects, either dealing with homosexuality in the church, or dealing with witchcraft in the church, or anything like that. That's something that I have to deal with, as far as, am I going to hold the church accountable for some of its, more fanatical type of people? Or am I going to move on, say that the church is not the ones that are to blame, it's the fanatical people that are just hate-filled people? Am I going to hold them accountable and not the church? So, that's something that I have to deal with on my own terms, and whether or not I can move beyond that. And if I can't, why not? So, that can be the same thing with rape culture. In these myths of any religion, whether it be a myth of Christianity or a myth of the Greek pantheons, the Hellenic pantheons, is that something that you can accept that has happened and move on, and not necessarily dwell on it, but can you move on from it? And this is also something that I want to go on another little tangent about, that I do sell things on eBay, as many of you know. I do sell stuff on eBay, and from time to time, I come across something that is kind of in the Nazi memorabilia realm, and I have sold that in the past. Do I make a habit of it to do that often? Absolutely not. Is it something that I like to do? Not really, because I don't like to fuel the fire and the hatred that is behind the Nazi memorabilia and whatnot. But is it still part of history, which is the main aspect of my business, is preserving history, or educating people about history and whatnot. That is the main aspect of my business. And if I were to take a little pendant that belonged to an SS officer, let's say, which I don't have one, but let's say I had one. If I were to take that and throw that out, I am literally throwing away history, and that just, to me, I can't throw away history. I can't put it in the garbage. I can't say that it was irrelevant, because many people died because of it. So, I can't do that. As a historian type, I cannot do that. And if you see over here, there's Jelly. So, as a historian, I cannot throw out history. It's something that I love. It's something that I want to preserve for generations to come, so they can learn and grow and extrapolate what exactly it means to them that there were evil people and now they are not here anymore. And to further educate them on the aspects of that history and the good that has come out of it and the evil that has come out of it. So I just want to say that there are certain things like that I have sold that I'm like, don't get a warm fuzzy from it, but you know what? It is history. It needs to be preserved in a way. So whether that be in a museum, whether that be in somebody's personal collection, that is something that I deal with whenever it comes to selling something, especially online. So, question number 1 out of the way. Let's move on to question number 2. Question number 2, how do you accept that the original society of your path, your ancestors did things and held certain attitudes you do not agree with? This is something that I dealt with whenever I look at my ancestry and my genealogical research and whatnot, which I absolutely love to do because, again, I'm a history buff. I love to see things in history. I have found, not so removed from me, my great-grandfather raped my great-grandmother, and the product of that rape was my grandmother, supposedly. And there is some story to the contrary that, no, that's not what happened, and there is some story that says, yes, that is what happened, and they come from 2 different of my great aunts. So whether or not that is actually something that is true or not really sure, not really certain, but his last name is actually part of my magical name, and I keep that as a reminder that not all of your heritage is always going to be good. And what do we learn from that? I have learned that even though he did some evil things and he ran around on all these people and everything, he is still a part of me. And from that, I've grown, and I vow that I won't stand by that type of action. I will acknowledge that there are some good aspects to him, like he fought in World War I. He was in Champagne, France, where he was gassed. There were some good aspects to this man. However, there are many terrible aspects to this man. So, even though there are certain things whenever it comes to my ancestry and with certain people that my ancestors may have come in contact with, there may be some things that are definitely evil, as I see them today, that may have been more acceptable back then, especially back in the 1940s. Yeah, that you could rape your wife, and that was acceptable back then. Nobody batted an eye at it. It was not illegal. So that is something that I've come to see as we've grown as society, and I won't accept that type of action happening within my family if I can prevent it. And I will help those that need that type of help. I will help them find the help that they need. I will be that conduit to guide them to wherever they need to be. So, how do I accept that? Again, I accept it that it is history. It is something that has happened. It is something that I cannot change that has happened. But I can change the future, and I can change what's happening right this moment in time. So, from that, I can change from here on out. I cannot change what happened yesterday. I cannot change what happened, 60, 70, 80 years ago. So, unfortunately, I can't change it. That's just the way it is. So, in essence, it's just something that you have to learn from and grow from in that aspect. Because, after all, what is your next step? What's the plan, Phil? What's the plan? So, anyway, little bit of levity. Number 3. How do you combat ideas or beliefs within your own path that you do not agree with? How can one find it in themselves to worship and love gods who act in ways you do not agree with, that make you uncomfortable to have in your practice and in your life? Okay, as far as my personal pantheon is, as many of you know, Christ and Sophia. So, with those two, there are aspects of Sophia that kind of... I don't think that the mythology as Sophia as I know her, I don't think the mythology is necessarily truly accurate to the way that I know her. So, there is an aspect that the mythology that you've always been told may not be what is actually true. However, there are different aspects to people. The aspect that they show as a deity figure to you could be more loving and more caring than the aspect that they show to another person. For instance, to me, Christ is shown as a loving father figure, where he is okay with whoever you are. He is one that is just loving and accepting and doesn't care necessarily whether or not you believe in him, but that you live a good moral life, that you care for your fellow human being in the best way possible, in the most that you can. That is the Christ as I know him. So many others will say that no, he spoke about homosexuality being bad, and he spoke about hating this type of person and hating this type of person, where they kind of put him into this box of this is the way that he is and this is the only way that he is, which, human being, has different aspects. To me, like I said, he has always come to me as a loving person, an accepting person, somebody that, just wants to be there to help you in whatever way that you need help. That is the Christ figure as I know him. In the same aspect with Sophia, a very loving, caring individual that she is more interested in helping me grow, and kind of like a mother figure, but not a smother figure. And yes, she has gotten angry at me. She's gotten downright pissed off. And whenever it comes to that, that's the aspects that I see of her. I have not seen the aspects where she felt ashamed, as is told in the Gnostic scriptures and whatnot. I have not seen those aspects of her. Then we go into the demiurge, which in Gnostic scriptures is the Old Testament God figure, which was very hateful, very vengeful, and whatnot. As many of you have heard the terrible quotes in scripture. Most of those come from the Old Testament, so most of that is Old Testament fire and brimstone God, and I don't necessarily think that is necessarily the same God that Christians think it is. And I don't know where that God went. I don't think that is the same God that is around today, whether you call it all or source or whatever. I just call that being God. Just plain God. Anyway, getting a little too tangenty here. The overall aspect of God, the way that I see God, is that may have been a different aspect or a different side of the same being, or may have just been a completely different being altogether, whatever. So how can we worship that type of being that was once fire and brimstone and is now nice and cheery and chipper? Maybe they weren't the same beings. Maybe, there was other things going on that aren't in that book or aren't in the mythology. Within the Hellenic path, and I want to preface this by saying I'm not an expert by any means in the Hellenic path, so definitely talk to Angelo about something like this. But whenever it comes to the Hellenic path, maybe something that the writers of this mythology saw as rape was maybe it was actually a loving, S&M type of relationship that was not seen by this person that wrote it. Maybe it actually was consensual sex. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was rape. But let's just say, for argument's sake, the mythology that has been told is actually accurate. How do we end up still worshiping or going with that deity and loving that deity in a way that, is in our best interest? Maybe the way that the being is showing themselves to you is not the same aspect or the same part of that being that it was back then, if that makes sense. And by that I mean, the overall God that I worship is the Judeo-Christian God concept, but do I think the same God concept that I worship now is the same one that it was back in the Old Testament? Maybe not. Maybe it is a different side of the same coin. And one thing that I want to point out is that Lady Gravedancer has also pointed out she doesn't share much about her work with Hecate, but there are aspects that certain deities show to one person that they don't show to another person, and may not actually fall in line with the mythology that it is based on, because that's not what that person needs, or is not part of how that deity wants to interact with that person. So that is sort of the same aspect that I see with Sophia and with Christ. You know, they show me certain aspects, certain parts of themselves, and they interact with me in that way that, you know, I find as caring and loving, and telling me exactly what I need to hear, whether I want to hear it or not. But they don't show me the aspects of, you know, the fire and brimstone, thou shalt nots, and whatnot. So take into consideration what parts of those deities are actually showing themselves to you, if that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, do go ahead and comment in the bottom bar, and I will try to clarify as much as possible, as per usual. So, question number 4, the coup de grace, and then hopefully I can edit this down so it's not like a half an hour long or more. If at all costs you have to let an aspect of the practice slip, how do you accept that your pantheon has holes in it? Can you fill those holes? How can you feel sure in your beliefs, even with personal tweaks that are not shared by anyone else? If I let parts of my practice slip, you know, such as the Old Testament beliefs of thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, or you know, it's an abomination if a man sleeps with a man like he sleeps with a woman, blah blah blah, all that BS. Even if I let all that slip and I just say, you know, not having it, not dealing with it, not part of my cosmology, because that is not the Christ that I know, that is not the overall God that I know. They really could give two shits less, and I think they have more things on their plate to deal with than whether or not I like to sleep with guys. So, anyway. How do I accept that my pantheon may have holes in it, or that my practice has holes in it? In my personal opinion, it doesn't. To me, it is a full-blown practice that, you know, the good outweigh the bad, and for me, they don't have holes in it, because those holes get filled with something else, such as in my early practice, I did not have a goddess. I've spoken on this many of times before. One way that I filled the Christian Wiccan part of my practice, as I was labeling then, one way that I filled the hole of not having a goddess was I have my ancestors, which I still do really feel connected with, and they have a permanent spot on any altar that I build. I have my ancestors in my practice. So that took the place of a goddess figure. Not necessarily saying that, you know, for me, there is no goddess out there ever, never will be, blah, blah, blah. But for me at that time, I did not have one. I did not feel that I needed one. I did not feel called to one. I did not feel that it was an aspect of my practice that I necessarily needed at that time. And I filled it with my ancestors, which were balanced between male and female ancestors, which I have some very strong women in my family that I do pay homage to, that were very strict with some of them, and some of them were very open-minded. There's a good balance between the types of individuals that are in my ancestral pantheon, that are recognized in my ancestral pantheon. I, again, leave it open to all the other ancestors that wish the best for me to come through as well, but the specific ones that I name whenever I open circle or whenever I have ritual space, those are the specific ones that I pay homage to for different reasons. So that's how I filled that hole. And it wasn't really necessarily a hole that I had to fill. If I did not feel that I needed a feminine aspect on my pantheon, I didn't have to have one. That's just something for me that I felt, I wanted to have in that space. And that goes the same for any of you out there that don't include ancestors in your practice. If that's not something that you need, then it's not a hole in your practice. If it is something that is vitally needed, then you'll find a way to work with it, or work around it, or adapt and overcome. That is some way that you will find in your own way. So I don't know how to really give advice on that one. But whenever you see a hole that needs filled, you fill it. And that could be with any other type of individual practice. And the second part of that question is, how can you feel sure about your beliefs, even with personal tweaks that are not shared by anyone else? Okay, my personal tweaks were specific to me in my early practice that, other people weren't really doing this, at least not that I've seen. So for me, that was something that I had to come up with, that I had to do a little personal tweak. That's a way that I adapted and overcame. And everybody will find their own way, and everybody's practice is unique to them and them alone. So that's really what it all comes down to, is what works for you and how does it work for you. And as long as if it works for you, great. It doesn't have to work for anybody else, but if it does, fantastic. If other people learn from it and grow from it, fantastic. But it doesn't have to work for everybody else. It only has to work for you in your practice. And the way that I felt sure in my belief at that time that this was a valid way of practicing was, for one, I talked to somebody. I said, hey, does this make sense? Could I do that? And they said, yeah. You can do whatever you want. And, I share that to you guys. Whatever you want to do, yeah, it's a valid part of your practice. As long as if it doesn't harm anybody else, like you're not going out and doing anything that's illegal or overall immoral. If you want to substitute something in your practice, go for it. That's something that is a personal tweak that you do, that is personal to you, and that will only amplify your practice. Was there more that was involved in being sure of my practice beyond that person saying that, yes, I can do that? Yeah. I did spell work, and, the spell work worked. So results showed that my practice was also valid. Not only from a person telling me that is a valid way of practicing, but also results. So for me, that was a way of validating that, yes, this is something that that does work, and it works well for me. So I hope that hits all the points that I wanted to hit, and I hope that hits all the points that birdsetfree was asking about. I hope I made sense of all of it, and I hope that this helps other people out there that are asking similar questions and whatnot. So I'm going to wrap this up because this is going to be a bitch to edit, and yeah, whatnot. So anyway, until next week, may you guys have love, hugs, and ladybugs. Bye-bye.